Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulullah. We continue reading from Imam Al-Ghazali's on disciplining the soul, Kitab Riyadat al-Nafs, translated by P.J. Winter, Abdul Hakim Murad. We are still in the reading from the introduction. We are on page 24, and this is part of the third section on early Islamic psychology. We have already read and discussed certain notions about the what might be construed as a certain conflict between body and soul, the influence of some Christian sources on the idea, and even earlier than this, Neo-Platonism, and the how some early Islamic piety were inspired by a rejection of the Umayyad rule, armed dissent, as in the case of Shiites and Kharijite sects. And the Kharijites are Sunnis who, according to what we have, there's a hadith about that prophesies about their emergence, that their piety is personal piety in terms of worship, adhering to the Sunnah is impeccable, but their problem is not this kind of piety. They had no piety when declaring Muslims as non-believers, and thus making it lawful for them to kill those Muslims, take their money and their women. And there was a period when a Jew or a Christian would not be touched by those Kharijites. It was really against Muslims that lasted for quite some time. And in general, the Kharijites, the very idea of declaring the society as non-believer, or the governments or specific leaders, the problem is justifying the violence against the society. I have addressed this before, but I will continue to address this issue. It does first of all, if one goes to the interpretation of these verses, especially the three verses in Surah Al-Ma'idah, about those who do not rule according to divine rule, according to the divine decrees. وَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. That's the highest level. If you go back to the books of tafsir, exegesis of the Quran, you'll find that's really a matter of taking place in the court of judges, and was not about the polity per se. This is not to give a carte blanche to the rulers, but that's really something that is ignored in the contemporary Islamic movements, or by rendering the society at large as a Jahili society, again declaring the society as a society of non-believers, and therefore issuing the fatwa to attack any official, whether it's a policeman or a governor, etc. That's part of the story. With the Shiites, it's an ongoing conflict, not necessarily armed conflict as it is depicted here. I say not necessarily because it does take place, but one should not forget about the history of the Sunnite Shiite relationship. At the very beginning, it was simply a rejection of the caliphate of Bakr and Umar radiallahu anhu. But over the years, they have developed certain uh, theologies that are irreconcilable with the Islamic worldview. And of course, there are certain differences in jurisprudence, though it was not the case uh, in the original scenario. And in certain there is advocacy of Shiism in areas where there were no Shiites historically. They give um, scholarships. So people go from Africa to places like Qum, for example, in Iran. They study and they go back as imams, um, advocating the 12th Imamite Shiism. So this was part of what we have read, not everything. And then there were examples of those who renounced the material world. For example, Malik ibn Dinar. There were those who would not eat even except every now and then. Those who would consider things as luxury even there. And the translator pointed more than once to the median, to the moderate, to the you know position of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where one does not need and should not really go into extremes in almost punishing the body, forcing it to endure severe deprivation of to deprive the body of food, for example, for extended period. We know very well that the Prophet ﷺ, there were periods when out of lack of food, that's a different story. When the Aisha anha, said that there were 3 crescents, meaning 2 months that have passed, in which they consumed al-aswadain, meaning the dates of Medina are black, small and black, and water, except for gifts of milk from the indigenous Ansar. But when there was food, we know that Prophet ﷺ also loved to eat from the shoulder uh, of the slaughtered animals. At any rate, we continue reading. Towards the middle of the second Islamic century, mid 8th century, here it says AD. I would use CE, Common Era. I think this is more appropriate Islamically, rather than the year of the Lord, the AD, Anno Domini. CE, the Common Era. This rigorous asceticism began to be tempered by a rediscovery of the transformative, often passionate love of God and confidence in His mercy. This attitude found a degree of scriptural warrant. The Quran had proclaimed that those who have faith have more love of God, while a popular prayer attributed to the Prophet ﷺ ran, O Lord God, grant me love of Thee and love of those who love Thee, and love of that which brings me greater or nearer to the love of Thee, and render Thy love dearer to me than cool water. اللهم نسأل محبك وحب أن يحبك. Yes. وحب عمل يقربه إلى حبك. That's part of the one version of this. Even the Baghdad mystic Bishr al-Hafi, revising earlier stresses on the dread of meeting a wrathful God, declared, only a doubter resents death, for a lover will always love meeting his beloved, whatever the circumstance. Now, to say who is Bishr al-Hafi, he was a contemporary of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal. So one day, a lady came and she asked the Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal for a fatwa whether she could uh, spin wool uh, at night in the light of the in the light that comes from the policemen guarding the streets of Baghdad. So this is like public. It's a public property, if you will. But she was worried whether she wanted to make sure that what she was doing is halal. So he asked her, "Who are you?" She said, "I'm the sister of Bishr al-Hafi." At that moment, Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal said, "من بيتكم يخرج الورع." It is from your house that piety uh, emerges, flows, comes out, like your house is the house of piety. The moment she said, I'm the sister of Bishr al-Hafi. Even more influential was Yahya ibn Mu'adh, the preacher from the Persian city of Ray, whose teaching of hope in God with a consequentially benign attitude to the things of this world. He was famous for his public banquets, was an example accepted by a number of later mystics. These two alternatives of fear of God and hope in His mercy were, in early Muslim piety, closely associated with differing understandings of the world. In the austere milieu of the first century, this was an enemy bewailed and condemned in innumerable sermons and pious counsels. For instance, Al-Hasan al-Basri, precursor of the Sufis at Basra, the world, he said, the world is a place of departure, not of permanence. Adam was expelled from heaven into it only as a punishment. So be aware of it. For the sole provision which one may take from it is not having taken from it, while the only prosperity which is to be had in its poverty in it is poverty. Beware of this treacherous, faithless, deceitful about this world, about dunya. Yet whereas in Christ now the comment of the translator with yet whereas in Christianity the religious life had demanded a categorical rejection of the world as fallen, the fall, Islam, unencumbered by a doctrine of original sin. We don't have the concept of original sin, whereby it is transferred to all the children of Adam, as in Christianity. We don't have that. And in fact, the Quran is very clear that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgave Adam alayhi salam, فتاب عليه. So, unencumbered by a doctrine of original sin, meaning Islam, and inspired by the Quranic image of the world as created for human usufruct as well as temptation, was in the course of its second and third centuries able to evolve a relatively more cheerful attitude, often holding that the world was morally neutral and that the worth or hazard of any participation in it was determined by the extent of an agent's conformity to the revealed law and his inner purposes. To cite Ibn Mu'adh again, how could I refrain from loving the world? How could I refrain from loving the world, wherein God has given me livelihood and nourishment, whereby I am able to preserve my earthly life, the life in and by which I can achieve that obedience to God which guides me to the next world. Rarely is the world, the dunya, condemned to the court in Sufi tracts. Instead, it is the it is the hub dunya, love of the world, against which the spiritual wayfarer must continually secure himself. Let's remember that Imam Ahmad himself, uh, it's not about banquets now, it's not about punishing the body by not eating except every 15 or 20, 25 days. Uh, he detested lessening your intake of food if it really cripples you, prevents you from performing your duties. These polarities, opposite polarities, of course, both of fear or hope towards God and of rejection, I'm talking about in practice, and of rejection or celebration of the world had become well-developed traditions by the fourth Muslim century, when the first Sufi compendia were compiled. These, in most cases, represent a mature piety, which sought to reap the benefits of both possibilities. الرجاء والخوف both go together, not as opposites, uh, as was the case earlier historically, but from the viewpoint of practical method, the problem remained as to which path the devotee should tread: that of grieving self, discipline through fasts and night vigils, or the way of thankfully enjoying God's blessings. The frequency of the debate over the relative worth of fear and hope, or renunciation and consumption, suggests that Sufi initiatives or Sufi initiates were not always sure how to combine the two in practice. The resolution of this tension was sought in multiple ways. One of these, which found support in the teaching of the Prophet himself, ﷺ, stressed an awareness of the importance of right intention in religious acts. So you talk about niyyah, you talk about ikhlas. Muslim spirituality had always been sensitive to this. Actions depend on their intentions. إنما الأعمال بالنيات. A hadith famously affirms, and every man is credited only with that which he has intended. وإنما لكل امرئ ما نوى. Uh, a version of this hadith shows that it's the first one in Sahih al-Bukhari. And of course the complete version of the hadith: فمن كانت هجرته الله ورسوله فهجرة الله ورسوله، ومن كانت هجرته إلى دنيا يصيبها أو امرأة ينكح فهجرته ما هاجر إليه. If you hear the verily the action is considered according to intention, and every man is credited only with that which he has intended. Uh, if he had migrated for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and for the sake of the Prophet, then that's what it is. And if he migrated for a worldly gain, or for the sake of women to marry, then his migration is exactly for that, meaning it's not a spiritual nature, it's not for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Al-Hasan al-Basri declared, men are consigned everlastingly to heaven or to hellfire only by virtue of their intentions. One early Sufi recounts how he was once late for attendance at his mosque, and realizing that for years he had taken unconscious pride in praying in the front row, forced himself to repeat all the prayers that had thus been polluted by ostentation. About the front row, I know how there's competition really for the front row, and it does cause problems sometimes uh, between the Muslims in certain mosques that I have witnessed, unfortunately, ongoing problems. because there are reservations that take place. So if you try to pray in the front row, you'll find that it is reserved. People reserve for each other. They leave part of their belongings to preserve, to like as a reservation. Uh, and it did. I've seen numerous times. I've seen this. Now, I want to share with you what Imam Ghazali says. First, the front row, الصف الأول, uh, the front row is that Imam Ghazali says it is that which is not interrupted by the pulpit, for example, or by pillars in the mosque, or, which means it often it is pushed to the third, fourth, fifth, or sixth even row. That will be the first row, technically speaking. And also, Imam Ghazali said that there were those. He gave example of someone who would be the first at the mosque for the Friday prayer, the first, meaning there is no one still in the occupying the front row, but he would still pray at the very end of the mosque. For him, the first row, he understood it as being early at the mosque, rather than competing negatively with others about space. There hence developed a recognition that acts of self mortification could achieve the reverse of their intended effect by opening doors into an unwitting vanity, which might damage the heart far more deeply than any indulgence in worldly pleasure. This recognition and the consequence or consequent practice of meticulously scrutinizing the conscience found its best expression in the writings of the early Baghdad mystic Al-Harith al-Muhasibi. Muhasibi, more than any other writer, is Imam Ghazali, is Ghazali's precursor, and his influence is especially apparent in the realm of ethics and self-discipline. His lengthy disquisitions on self-delusion, ghurur, that vice of the soul which contaminates spiritual works with vainglory, commend the practice of muhasabah, self-examination, from which muhasibi's name is itself said to derive. Before each of your acts, he argued, ask why and for whom. Should it be for God, then continue. While should it be for anyone else, then cease, stop, and blame your soul for having pointed you towards the impulses of passion. Without muhasabah, ascetic piety is liable to rebound against its practitioners. How many a one who was diligent in the performance of outward acts of service has become fuel for the flames of hell, and his acts of service have become a dust strewn abroad. Though there were to come to you a revelation that you were praised by the Lord of the throne, yet it would behove you to cleave to fear and godliness. Next is a different development, another development in Sufism, in Sufi literature. The Abdul Hakim Murad, DJ Winter says the evolution of mystical typology of stations, maqamat, and that this the first attempt was by a contemporary of Muhasibi, ذو النون المصري, the Egyptian. This inshallah will leave to the next session بإذن الله عز وجل. Until then, سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.